Hi, welcome back. We are officially in week 2 of our metabolic loop. It's our third week together, including that prep week. So I just want to honor where we're at so far. You've already done some hard work. You've pulled out the foods that are clearly irritating your system, things like gluten and dairy. We've also gotten rid of seed oils and alcohol and gums and processed foods and prepackaged foods and fast foods and sugar. That's a lot. So you're asking a lot of yourself. And remember, specifically for gluten and dairy, we're going to continue this for at least 3 weeks. And then we're going to strategically add those back in. Some people will notice that their system gets better and they actually start to feel better once they remove those. That happens for a lot of people, but not everybody. Some people will only notice what changes their bodies has gone through and what improvements that they have been experiencing. Those will become more noticeable when you strategically add those back for those couple of doses. So either way, we're doing a lot of changing. Now the seed oils and the packaged foods and the processed foods and the sugar and all of that is going to be something that we want to remove from our diet completely ongoing. But for gluten and dairy specifically, I would love for you to be able to do it for 30 days, but I'm asking you to do it for at least 3 weeks. And so we're about a week into that. So pat yourself on the back because that's a lot. Changing your diet is very hard, but you can do hard things. So you've cleaned things up, probably cleaner than you've ever eaten, or maybe you've been doing this for a while and you just have gotten really clear about what it is that you need to remove from your diet. Either way, you may be feeling better, or you may still feel bloated or tired after meals, or still feeling like your body didn't get the memo that we're on this healthy train, right? And that's where some people will hit the wall. They think, I've removed the junk, so why don't I feel better? Like immediately. And the reason is simple. Removing irritants isn't the same as restoring function. Your gut can't heal if the system that runs digestion isn't even turned on. And you're going to find out why digestion is so important. It's literally the first step in your gut health. And so it has to be turned on. This is where the restore phase begins. And this is where we reignite the fire that makes digestion work in the first place, your stomach acid. Okay. So most people only ever hear about stomach acid in the context of having too much of it. Heartburn, reflux, indigestion. It's always blamed on excess acid. But here's what almost no one tells us, that having too much stomach acid is exceedingly rare, like very rare. Low stomach acid and high stomach acid feel the same. They both cause bloating, burning, reflux, sometimes pressure, sort of pressure in the belly, maybe pressure in the chest after eating. So when a doctor hears those symptoms, a traditional doctor hears those symptoms, they reach for acid blockers to protect the esophagus. And yes, that protects the surface of the tissue of the esophagus for a while, but it turns off the fire that drives digestion. And it actually is it's like putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms without ever going back to what's causing those symptoms. And treating acid reflux or heartburn or bloating with proton pump inhibitors or acid blockers is actually making the problem worse. Okay. Because the problem wasn't too much acid to begin with. It was acid that is in the wrong place and not enough of it in the right place. And I'll explain that in just a second. When we suppress acid, and as we age, our acid production naturally decreases. So when we suppress it even more by putting you on these acid blockers, proton pump inhibitors, food stops breaking down properly. And it sits in the stomach for too long. So when it does that, it essentially rots or it ferments. Gas builds up and you end up with even more reflux because there is how the stomach is formed is that there's a muscle at the bottom called the pylorus, which is a strong muscle. And there's a muscle at the top where the esophagus connects to the stomach. It's pretty strong, but it's not as strong as the pylorus. So when you have this food in your stomach that is fermenting and creating this gas and expanding the stomach, that pressure has to go somewhere. And the lowest pop-off valve is going to be that lower esophageal sphincter. And so you can have reflux, you can have belching, you can have reflux of fluids like bile, or you could actually have reflux of food back into the esophagus. And that's what traditional practitioners are treating with those acid blockers and proton pump inhibitors, but they're actually causing the problem. So you don't get the symptoms, but you still have the issue. Okay, so here is what's supposed to happen when we digest food. Actually, the moment you smell food or even think about food, your brain tells your stomach to get ready. Acid begins to flow with that first bite. This is why we also want you to be in the right frame of mind when you eat. We really need to be in that Zen state, in that rest and digest state, because that actually improves our gastric acid flow. And remember, as we're aging, our gastric acid is decreasing. So we need something to overcome that, right? We need something to help that out. And getting in that rest and digest mode before we even start to eat is one of the things that we can do. So don't be multitasking. Don't be eating lunch at your desk. Don't be eating lunch on the go, standing at the counter, driving in your car, doing 10 things at once. You really want to go to a place that you enjoy, maybe outside, maybe have some soft music playing when you're eating your dinner. You might want to have some candlelight. We need to honor the meal time so that we can get our parasympathetic tone going. We can have that Zen state, that rest and digest. And that's going to help us to overcome the fact that our gastric acid is already low as we start to age, or it decreases as we start to age. So then you want to not have a million things going on, because you really want to visualize, you want to smell, you want to think about the food that you're getting ready to eat, because that also helps your acid production. Acid begins the flow even before the first bite. And it is what starts the chemical breakdown of protein, but it also sends two critical messages downstream. One to the pancreas saying release pancreatic enzymes, and the other one to the gallbladder saying get bile ready. Now, if you don't have a gallbladder, just know that your liver is still producing bile and you will still have bile flow organ for bile. And so when you eat a fatty meal, a lot of fat and a lot of bile gets released on top of that so that it helps to digest the fat. So when you don't have a gallbladder, you're still producing that bile. It's just leaking out a little bit at a time. So you will still have bile. The other thing that we need to talk about here is the fact that we're talking about chemical breakdown of our food, but we still need to be involved with the mechanical breakdown of our food. Most people chew about 3 to 4 times before they swallow their food, and that isn't nearly enough to actually mechanically break down the food and start the process and help out the chemical breakdown. So you really want to chew your food about 15 times. I know that seems like a lot, but you really want your food the consistency of soup when it enters your stomach. That will make the smaller amount of gastric acid that we naturally have as we age, that will make that even more effective, because that first part of breakdown has already happened because of the chewing process. Okay, that cascade, when we have that gastric acid being kind of like the starter gun that causes pancreatic enzyme release and then causes bile release, it's beautifully timed. It's like the starter pistol at the beginning of the race. When that gun fires, everything downstream takes off exactly when it should. If the acid signal never fires, everything else is late or doesn't start at all. Enzymes don't arrive when they should. Bile isn't released efficiently, and food is going to linger half digested. That delays gastric emptying, that allows the food to ferment in the stomach, and it allows that reflux to happen, belching, or the food will eventually release through that stronger muscle in the pylorus into the small bowel. And the small bowel isn't meant to digest, it is meant to absorb. So it's supposed to accept this already digested food. And when we don't have gastric acid, that isn't going to happen. When we haven't chewed our food well, that isn't going to happen. When we don't have those pancreatic enzymes or we don't have that bile release, that's not going to happen. So that's why some people will need help in this area, and they will actually need some digestive enzymes. And what those digestive enzymes include are things like hydrochloric acid or betaine. Those are things that help with our gastric acid. It can also include pancreatic enzymes. If it's a digestive complete, it usually includes pancreatic enzymes and those things that help with bile flow. If you've been on a proton pump inhibitor, if you are older, if you know that you have, based on your blood results or some other things, if we see that you have low gastric acid, then I always recommend when we're thinking about digestive enzymes, that we actually think about a complete digestive enzyme. That you can also use apple cider vinegar to kind of increase the gastric acid production, or to add that acidic like environment to help that digestive process. So that single delay in starting that starter gun delays the whole race. It changes the whole race. So think of what happens next. Protein stays in large chunks instead of being broken down into its smallest particles, which are amino acids. Fat isn't emulsified or broken down into small droplets so that it can actually be absorbed. And starches aren't reduced to usable glucose. The food now sits in the stomach longer than it should because the chemical part of digestion never really started. And when it finally moves into the small intestine, it's in the wrong form. It's too big, it's too raw. And that's where irritation begins. The small intestine, like I said, is where we should be absorbing nutrients. It's where your immune system stands guard. It expects to see tiny, tidy, fully digested nutrients. When half-processed food shows up, it reacts like there's an invader in the neighborhood. So it doesn't see that food as food because it doesn't look like what it's expecting. It expects the smallest particle sizes, and it's seeing these bigger chunks of food. So it looks at it as an invader. That irritation makes the intestinal lining inflamed and leaky. Remember, we think of our gut as this tough organ when really it's one cell thick. It's got a mucus layer on top. That's where about 70 to 80% of our immune system lives. And right underneath of that is the rest of our immune system. And so you can see how fragile it really is and how these larger particles have to go through. They loosen up, they cause inflammation in these cells, and it loosens up that tight junction that's supposed to act like a barrier. And when that's loosened up, that is by definition, that is leaky gut. So remember, the lining is only one cell thick, about as thin as a piece of tissue paper. So when it becomes inflamed, those tight junctions pull apart. Now, instead of nutrients being transported through the cell across this cell membrane into the bloodstream, they are actually shuttled in between the cells, and they actually widen the junctions that are opened up. They actually widen it so that they can get through, and that just perpetuates that leaky gut. Also, your immune system sees those fragments and says, this doesn't belong here. This is not what I expected to see. And it starts mounting a defense, mounting an inflammatory defense. It's not just immune cells. It's actually the hundreds of chemical mediators that go along, that send all of that are the coordinated communication system between our immune cells, that actually go out into the systemic circulation and cause a lot of the problems that we have. That's why we say that you may have inflammation and irritation that starts in the gut, but it eventually becomes systemic because not only because of the immune cells, but also because of those chemical mediators. And that also puts more load on our detox systems because we have to go out and clean that up, or it continues to cause problems. We can see it as brain fog. We can see it as skin irritations, rashes. We can see it as achy joints. We can see it as low energy. We can see it as fatigue after meals. Like, that's how this inflammatory process that gets going because we haven't digested our food, as simple as that, how that can become the systemic thing that shows up in our symptoms that affects the way that our cells create energy, affects the way that we lose weight or don't lose weight. It really affects literally everything. That's why we're starting in the gut. So here's the kicker, that inflammation keeps the lining from healing. So even though you removed gluten or dairy and you removed seed oils and all the gums and all the preservatives that you can, that you can't calm down until digestion itself is restored. And that's why, if you've never focused on digestion before and you've sort of cleaned up your diet and you've still felt stuck, that's why, because this has to be the next step. You got to remove those offenders, and now we have to work on digestion. Okay, so your symptoms are messages. So let's translate what your body's been saying. When you feel full after small meals, it's not that you ate too much, it's that the food is laying in the stomach too long because acid is low. Sometimes people will say, after I eat protein, I feel like I have a brick in my stomach. That is because of low stomach acid. When you have reflux after eating protein, it's not too much acid, it's fermentation, pushing half digested food or that buildup of gas back up into the esophagus. When you see undigested food in your stool, it means that the signal for enzymes and bile never fired. When you feel tired after meals, it's because your body spent a ton of energy trying to digest that food, but you didn't get any nutrients back for the effort. Cravings, that's your brain begging for magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, nutrients that you can't absorb without gastric acid. Brain fog, that's a downstream effect of missing B12, iron, and healthy fats that feed your mitochondria. And these aren't just random annoyances, they are clear instructions from your body saying, hey, the fire's out, turn it back on. Okay, so now let's look at what we see on your core health panel and why we have some of the markers that we have in that core health panel. It's very strategic. These stories of what your body is dealing with or what it's trying to do or what it's missing, they show up in the numbers, okay? Low B12 shows that the acid was too weak to release it from the protein. Low ferritin, you're not absorbing iron efficiently. Or if it's high, it may mean that you have inflammation that's locking it away and you can't get to it. Low zinc, that's both a cause and an effect of low acid. Since zinc is required to make more acid, it could be that your body's using up that zinc to produce more acid. Low secretory IgA, that tells us that the immune lining of your gut is worn thin. And the reason that it's worn thin is because it's constantly trying to digest these big particles, or these big particles are rubbing against it and damaging it. When we see a CBC with low lymphocytes or high monocytes, that, remember, those are two different types of white blood cells, that confirms chronic gut-based stress or low-grade inflammation. And remember, it starts in the gut, but it goes systemic. So that's why we're seeing it in your serum. And all of this ties back to one simple truth. When the starter signal doesn't fire, the whole orchestra is out of tune. The race never starts. Gastric acid isn't just a digestive detail. It's literally foundational chemistry. It's the switch that turns the rest of digestion on. And without it, you can eat perfectly clean food and still feel inflamed, sluggish, and depleted. So I want you to think back, many times when I talk to people that they say, I'm eating clean, but I'm still having blah, blah, blah. I'm still having this brain fog. I'm still having belly pain. I'm still bloated. I'm still constipated. I don't know what the answer is. Well, this is because many people don't ever think about the gastric acid that they don't have, or they've been on proton pump inhibitors, acid blockers. They're treating the symptoms of reflux or gastroesophageal reflux disease. They're treating that by lowering the acid even further. Okay. The best food becomes waste if your body can't break it down and use it. So low acid keeps nutrients locked away, slows your metabolism, and leaves your immune system constantly irritated, constantly on alert. And that's why this restore phase matters so much. This is going to be the missing step that really gets you over the hurdle. Maybe you've been here plenty of times before. Maybe you've cleaned up your diet. Maybe you have, been eating well and all that sort of thing, but you still haven't gotten over the hump to where you actually have improvement that lasts. This is why. You're not just focusing on what you eat anymore. You're focusing on what your body can do with what you eat, right? Because it doesn't matter if it's in your diet if you're not digesting it. As a matter of fact, when I look at lab results for people and I see that there's a deficiency, I first ask these three questions. I ask, number one, is it in your diet? Like, is it on your plate, first of all? And if it's on your plate, is it getting absorbed? That's where we are right now. And that's a big stop sign for a lot of people. And if it's in your diet and you're absorbing it, once we fix this, you'll be absorbing it. Is it getting into the cells? And that's what the rest of the metabolic loop is about. And we will talk about that. But that's why this restore phase matters so much. We're not just focusing on what you eat, but what your body is doing with what you eat. Okay, so now that you can see why I call the stomach acid your digestive fire. When that fire burns low, the entire chain of digestion breaks down. Food sits too long, irritates the gut, breaks down your cell barrier, starves your cells, and then metabolism slows down because the engine isn't getting the fuel. So in our next video, we're going to follow the story downstream. What happens inside the small intestine when digestion stays incomplete? How your immune system begins reacting to food that should have been fuel, and how restoring the rhythm of digestion starts changing everything from inflammation to energy cravings. You've cleared what doesn't belong, and now you've learned to reignite what does. And next, we'll keep that rhythm going so that your body can finally repair itself. So I'll see you in the next video.